In 2007, Drew Houston posted a 4-minute screencast to Dig. The software in it barely worked. The jokes were tuned for Dig's audience. Overnight, the waiting list for a product that did not exist grew from 5,000 names to 75,000. Dropbox was not built yet. So why does almost every founder still build first? The screencast ran about 4 minutes. Houston narrated it himself, dragging files into a folder while a Family Guy reference and a jab at Dig's own commenters slid past in the file names. The audience was chosen before the script was written. That was the whole trick. The software behind the demo was, by Houston's own account, held together and incomplete. It did not need to work at scale. It needed to be legible for 4 minutes to a few thousand people who cared about syncing files. The waitlist reportedly went from around 5,000 names to 75,000 overnight. 2 years later, Joel Gascoigne did something quieter and arguably harsher. He built a 2-page website for a tool that scheduled tweets. Page 1 explained the idea. Page 2, which you only reached after clicking, was a pricing page. There was no scheduler. There was no backend, no queue, no account system. People clicked through to the pricing page, entered an email, and were told the plans were not ready yet. Within weeks, according to Gascoigne's own write-up, some of them were paying. Neither man was testing a product. Both were buying information, and the information had a price. Houston paid in attention and collected email addresses. Gascoigne paid in a weekend of HTML and collected credit card intent. That distinction matters more than it sounds. An email address is a weak signal. A completed checkout is a strong one. Both are cheaper to collect than a working system, and both arrived before the system existed. No engineers were briefed, no sprint was planned, no architecture decision was made, because there was nothing yet to architect. And yet the same decade that produced both of these tests also produced a 3-letter phrase that persuaded a generation of founders to build the thing first. The phrase was not wrong. It was mistranslated. The term itself is usually traced to Frank Robinson, a product strategy consultant around 2001. He used it to describe the smallest thing you could put in front of a buyer to learn whether they would pay. Steve Blank folded the idea into customer development. Eric Ries carried it to a global audience with the Lean Startup in 2011. Read that book closely, and the origin story is not a triumph. Ries has described shipping IMVU's first version in roughly 6 months, embarrassingly rough, and then watching almost nobody use it. The lesson he drew was not ship fast. The lesson was validated learning, the discipline of designing the cheapest possible test for the riskiest possible assumption. The problem is the middle word. Product carries a supply chain of expectations with it. Products have roadmaps, release dates, QA cycles, a name, a pricing page, someone whose title is head of product. Hypothesis test carries none of that. The moment you call your experiment a product, you have converted a question into a construction project. The question was whether anyone wants this. The project is whether you can build it by March. You have seen the symptom. A team spends 9 months in engineering, calls the output an MVP, and defers the demand question until after launch because launch is when you find out. They are not testing anything. They are gambling with a vocabulary borrowed from science. And here is the part that should not make sense. In 2011, this mistake was expensive but understandable because building was genuinely slow and genuinely hard. And once you had committed engineers, you may as well finish. Every year since, the cost of producing working software has fallen. By the logic of the method, that should have made the error harmless. It did the opposite. It made it worse, and the reason is not what most founders assume. Start with the infrastructure. In 2006, Amazon Web Services meant you no longer bought servers. In 2011, Stripe meant you no longer begged a bank for a merchant account. Rails, Django, React, all free, all maintained by strangers. Then came the no-code wave. Webflow, Bubble, Airtable, Zapier. A non-engineer could assemble something that took payments before lunch. And then AI code generation arrived, and a working application became a weekend project for one person with a laptop. Here is the perverse part. When building is cheap, building becomes cheaper than thinking. Sitting with an uncomfortable question for 3 days costs more emotionally than shipping a prototype in an afternoon. So founders ship, and shipping feels like evidence, because something exists that did not exist before. It is progress you can screenshot. It is just not proof that anyone wants it. CB Insights, in its analysis of startup postmortems, found that no market need was the most commonly self-reported cause of failure, appearing in roughly 42% of the cases they reviewed. That is the founder's own account, written after the fact. Juicero is the extreme version. Reportedly around $120 million raised for a $699 connected juice press. In 2017, Bloomberg demonstrated that you could squeeze the proprietary bags perfectly well with your hands. The machine worked. The premise did not. Fast is the more painful version, because the market was real. Dom Holland's one-click checkout company reportedly raised over $120 million. Revenue was reported in the hundreds of thousands. It shut down in April 2022. Neither company failed from bad engineering. Both shipped. Both shipped something that functioned. The standard advice at this point is to go talk to customers. But customers are polite, and interviews are cheap for them too. So if people will not tell you the truth when you ask, what does a real demand test actually measure instead? It measures cost. Specifically, what someone is willing to give up before the thing exists. In 1999, Nick Swinmurn wanted to know if people would buy shoes online. He did not build a warehouse. He walked into local shoe stores, photographed the inventory, put the pictures on a website, and when an order came in, he went back and bought the pair at full retail price. He lost money on every sale. What he bought instead was proof that strangers would type card details into a browser to get footwear delivered. The other pattern is the concierge test. You deliver the outcome by hand with no software underneath it. The founder is the algorithm, working nights in a spreadsheet while the customer sees only the result. It does not scale, and that is the point. You are testing whether the outcome is worth paying for before you spend 6 months automating an outcome nobody wants. From there, evidence has a hierarchy, and most founders live at the bottom of it. Clicks are the weakest signal. Email addresses are slightly better and still nearly free. Deposits cost something real. Signed letters of intent cost reputation inside the buyer's own company. A paid invoice is the only one that is difficult to fake. Rob Fitzpatrick's book, The Mom Test, frames this cleanly. Compliments are noise. Ideas are noise. What counts is commitment, meaning money, time, or reputation moved in your direction. Somebody saying they love your concept costs them nothing. Somebody introducing you to their boss costs them credibility if you turn out to be a waste of everyone's afternoon. So commitment is the measure. But commitment is not certainty. And this is where the method gets uncomfortable. Demand tests produce false positives too, sometimes enormous ones. One of the loudest yeses in the history of crowdfunding, millions of dollars from tens of thousands of eager backers, is the reason a company no longer exists. In 2014, a cooler raised about $13 million on Kickstarter. Roughly 62,000 backers wanted the coolest cooler, a plastic box with a blender, a speaker, and a bottle opener. Demand was not in question. Ryan Grepper had proof that tens of thousands of strangers would hand over money before a single unit existed. Then came manufacturing. Costs ran higher than the campaign price, the tooling was harder than expected, and the money ran out with thousands of backers still waiting. Some units shipped years late. Some never shipped at all. The company eventually dissolved. And according to reporting on the settlement with Oregon regulators, many backers were offered a discount code rather than a refund. Here is the distinction that matters. A demand test tells you people will pay a price. It tells you nothing about whether you can deliver at that price or whether the second sale costs less than the first. Willingness to pay and unit economics are two separate proofs, and founders routinely collect the first and assume the second. That gap is widening. When the build was expensive, code was the bottleneck and code was the moat. Now, a working product is a weekend and $40 of API credits. The scarce assets are distribution and margin, the boring proof that someone pays more than it costs you to serve them. You can watch this happening in real time. Through 2025, a steady wave of AI tools launched with genuine signups, real traffic, real excitement. Then, retention curves that flatten near zero by week 4. The landing pages stay up. The Stripe accounts go quiet. Nobody is writing those post-mortems yet, because the founders are still building. The next cohort of failure stories belongs to people who shipped faster than any generation before them, and who have not yet discovered which question they skipped.